So today our notes are going to start on page 127, but I actually wanted to stop for a minute and review what we've already talked about. Keep in mind that what we're trying to do here is start really big with the biosphere and move down the levels of organization to something much more specific, all the way down to one single organism. When we talk about the levels of the biosphere, we were basically explaining what areas on Earth do life exist on. Then from the biosphere, we had our different biomes that had similar temperature, similar rainfall, that allowed them to also have very similar vegetation. Then, from there we had our ecosystems, and along with talking about our ecosystems and the abiotic, non-living, and biotic living factors, we also mentioned yesterday about the biogeochemical cycles. And in the biogeochemical cycles, we saw that there's 4 systems that were really important to the ecosystem. There was the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. These 4 cycles have to move in and out of an ecosystem to provide the necessary inorganic and abiotic factors that all living things need. So just keep in mind that that's what we talked about previously. And that is part of that abiotic factor on top of temperature, pH, and so on. However, moving along through our notes on ecology, we also looked at the smaller levels, or the more specific levels of the biosphere. Going down from ecology, we had communities, which are just the biotic factors and how they interact with each other. We had our populations, one species of organism living in a specific area. And we had one single organism with its very specific niche, or its way of life, that included its habitat, resources, food, water, space that it needed, and any symbiotic relationships, any permanent relationships that an organism would need. And this is actually one of the things that we're going to focus on today, these symbiotic or permanent relationships. Then we talked about our trophic levels, our level of feeding. This is mainly going to be looking at our food webs and food chains. Just keep in mind when you look at a food web or a food chain, this linear image is going to represent your food chain. Whereas with a food web, you might have the hawk that also eats the mouse, but the mouse that also eats the plants. And so more connections are made in a food web, whereas with a food chain, you're just saying this is eaten by this, and energy is being passed this way. One thing to keep in mind, or make a note of right here, along our picture of this food chain, is that this is how energy moves in an ecosystem or community. And the reason why I write community there, why do I write community there? Because a community is just your biotic or living factors. And so you want to make sure you understand these terminology. Then we had our 10% rule, and basically as you move up the trophic levels through the levels of feeding, primary, secondary, tertiary, you'll lose 10% each way as you go. Each step as you go. Then we had our biogeochemical cycles with the water cycle, the carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, and nitrogen cycle. And today we're going to be, again, on page 127, and we're actually going to look at those symbiotic relationships. And a symbiotic relationship is a permanent relationship that two different organisms can have with each other. Looking at these pictures here, I wonder if you can guess what type of relationship is occurring. Here you have a fish with actually a little shrimp-like organism kind of moving in and out of its teeth. What is it doing? Here you have someone's foot, and a worm is literally moving out of the foot. And then on this side, you actually have some coral that are living here. What type of relationships are we seeing? Are there positive effects on both sides of the relationship? Especially with something like this, a worm in your foot. Is that a positive for you or a positive for the worm? Or is it both? So here we have our first type of biotic relationships, how you associate or connect two organisms in an ecosystem. So again, we're still looking at the ecosystem level. First, you have what's known as competition, and this is going to be struggling for resources among an organism. Next, you're going to have your predator-prey relationship, where the predator is going to feed upon the prey. Competition, however, can be seen in animals, such as bears defending their territory, trying to get food, potentially even getting a mate. However, with plants, don't forget that plants also have to compete for resources. They have to compete for nutrients in the soil. They have to compete for sunlight. They also have to compete for water. And plants and animals are going to have very distinct adaptations to help ensure their survival and help ensure their success. Another example, or an example of a predator-prey relationship, would be a snake and a frog. Obviously, the snake is our predator, and the frog, unfortunately, is the prey. But this is what we really wanted to look at today, and probably what's a little bit new to us. We have symbiosis, and this is a permanent relationship among two organisms. In the first type of symbiosis, we have mutualism. It is really important that you put the plus right here. This means for both organisms, it's going to be positive. Both organisms will benefit. Your example here is going to be a termite. And a termite, that's actually what you have a picture of right here, eats wood. But it's very difficult for an animal, such as a termite, to break down wood into the nutrients that it needs. So termites have protists, small unicellular organisms, inside of them to help them digest wood. Okay? So here's your termite. Inside the termite, you have these tiny little protists, and the tiny little protists live in the stomach of the termite and helps it digest, break down its food. Termite is able to digest its food. That's a positive. Protist also gets food and a safe place to live. So positive for both relationships. The other two types of symbiotic relationships, permanent relationships among organisms, is going to be commensalism. In commensalism, you have one organism benefiting, and the other doesn't benefit, but it's not harmed either. It just really doesn't matter. An example of this is moss on trees. The moss actually gets to live higher up. It might ensure their safety a little, prevent some of the animals from being able to reach them, but mainly it allows them to get more sunlight so they can do photosynthesis. But however, the trees aren't benefiting, they don't get anything out of this, and they're also not harmed. Another example of this example of this is called Remora Fish. These are the fish, you might have seen this on like magic school, that's a long time ago. But the Remora fish will actually swim right underneath a shark, a big shark. When the shark goes and hunts and there's scraps flying around, the little fish gets to eat the scraps. Now the shark gets nothing from the Remora fish, the small fish, but the little fish get a free meal and some safety actually. The last type of symbiotic relationship, permanent relationship, is parasitism, where one organism benefits, plus, and the other is harmed, negative. Example of this would be like a tapeworm that can live in the intestines of humans. The tapeworm will actually latch on to your intestine, and as you're eating, it will actually feed and pull nutrients from your body, and it'll get longer and longer and longer and longer and can grow the length of your intestine. Really good for the worm, really bad for you. You can become malnourished and you can actually get really sick and potentially even die from this. And you might not even know what's causing it. Other examples would be like ticks and fleas as well. The last thing that we want to talk about is population growth. In population growth, what we're looking at is, does a population grow where it seems like it's unlimited growth, there's nothing stopping it, or does it reach a point where it has to level off? So as an organism reproduces, the population increases and resources limit the growth, and populations are in dynamic equilibrium. What we're first seeing in this picture is a J curve. This is exponential growth. What you want to include here, or circle, or highlight here, is that this is unrestricted growth, meaning no limiting factors. A limiting factor, what could that be? A limiting factor could actually be water, food, space, potentially even finding a mate, a place for you and your mate to have offspring. So in a J curve, you'll see growth moving up just like in the shape of a J, and the population is unrestricted, or there's nothing stopping it or slowing it down. And an example of this could be with roaches. Roaches are a good example of this because they can grow what seems like unlimitedly, okay? Although you should know that eventually food is going to run out, space is going to run out, and that's going to affect them. For right now, humans overall are also experiencing this type of growth because there's really not that much stopping us, okay, compared to other organisms. We don't follow the same rules. We are not experiencing the same problems. There's not enough space, maybe we're going to build up instead, build taller buildings. If there's not enough food, we can get food from other countries. And so humans are currently kind of an example of the J curve as well. But this isn't realistic. Nothing in nature, in a regular ecosystem, should be able to have unrestricted growth. Everything has its limits. The next graph that we have here is, and I can't get rid of my drawings right now, but the next curve that we have is the S curve, and this is where the population growth stabilizes as a carrying capacity is reached. So here, let's get rid of this, you have what's known as restricted growth, and you reach a carrying capacity. Have limiting factors. This is the next picture that you have. So there gets to a point where there's only so much space, only so much food, only so much water, and so you can't exceed that carrying capacity. But what actually happens with your graph is that you'll move up and down that carrying capacity. Sometimes you'll overshoot, but when you overshoot and you have more of your population than you can handle, what happens? They start to die down. But they can continue going up and down, up and down. It's never ever a permanent thing or a very stable thing. A here again is our definition of carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the number of individuals an environment can support. When you're looking at this picture right here, it's showing you that accidents, pollution, disease, starvation, predators, old age, these are all things that can affect your carrying capacity. And actually either increase or decrease it. Limiting factors, here's our definition. Resources that control population growth, again, food, space, water. Some diseases that also act as a limiting factor could be AIDS, influenza, which is your regular flu, although there's many different types. Dutch elm disease, which is a disease that affects trees, and hysteria, which affects animals. And that's actually all for your notes today. Please take a minute to review the notes before we come to class.